So, being autistic and neurodivergent, I had to rely on side hustles, DoorDash, Uber, Turo, Airbnb, mostly Airbnb and Turo, because it was less stimulating. I had to rely on these things in order to make a living for myself, because being neurodivergent and autistic made finding employment and gainful employment really difficult and next to impossible. And so I relied on these things to make ends meet and to pay bills. When Turo and Airbnb crashed, when everything went under, I ended up losing my apartment. And with me losing my apartment, I became homeless. I got a job offer shortly after the fact. I went out of state to another city where I did not know anyone at whatsoever. And this was my first time, my first job offer that was gainful, that I could actually see myself in, build a future with, and actually make a wage. I went out of state for that, because I was so excited to have my own, my first real job offer. I went out of state homeless. I slept in my car, slept in a stranger's house. I actually ended up renting a room with someone I did not know, and that went south. It turned into an abusive situation where all he did was make fun of me for having autism and complain about me nonstop, and constantly talk down to me, constantly belittle me. And the situation became untenable to the point where I ended up, that went south really quickly. So I ended up leaving, sleeping in the rest stops in my car. I slept in my car for the longest time while I was working this job. But the point is, it's like, people with neurodivergence like myself, people with autism, we run the risk of being homeless. We run the risk of putting ourselves in abusive situations and abusive housing situations because of not being able to secure gainful employment. This is the type of stuff we deal with. We deal with having to live with people who are down to us, who put us down, who make fun of us, who bully us, who are bad for our mental health. We end up most likely in abusive relationships that end up being violent, which thankfully was not the case with me, but a lot of people in my shoes end up in situations like that because, they went to school, they're trying to do the right thing and build a career for themselves, and yet they end up in these circumstances. And so what kept happening, I was still determined as ever, even though the housing situation did not work out, it went south. And because the cost of living was so expensive in that area, I actually could not afford to get my own apartment right away, which is why I was in that situation to begin with, of renting a room from someone that I did not know who ended up treating me that way. But, I was determined to make this work. I slept in my car at the rest stop every night, while working this job. Eventually that became unsustainable. So, with the money I had to spend on gas, with the money I had to spend on food, that became unsustainable to the point where I thought to myself, okay, I'll pay for some hotel rooms, for the night, for several nights. In that area, once again, hotels are exorbitantly expensive. They're expensive all over the nation. And so I ended up leaving that job just because it was not paying me enough to be able to get my own apartment. And I do need my own space. Because of being autistic, that's a large part of why I need my own space. And so I ended up leaving that job altogether because it wasn't paying enough for me to sustain and create the life that is comfortable for me. But it gave me my first real experience at a gainful job, getting gainful employment. And it also taught me too that a lot of us as the neurodivergent people, we subject ourselves to degradation and abuse just so that we can have an opportunity to, have a good job, to be able to have opportunities to have health care and things of that nature, be able to build wealth. And that's the downside of being like me, being neurodivergent, coming from a family that doesn't have resources. We run the risk of finding ourselves in situations like this just to maintain, just to be able to have opportunities. And that whole situation taught me there's a better way. And it also taught me that I'm not about to allow myself to be degraded. I'm not going to allow myself to be talked down to and abused just for the sake of an opportunity, just for the sake of a job, especially a job that does not pay me enough to live the life that I want to live. I'm just not okay with allowing myself to be abused just for something that doesn't even work in the long run. Because in the long run, it didn't even work out for me in the long run. I ended up quitting that job because I couldn't even, afford to be there. So what did I gain in the long run other than some lessons that I can sit here and tell you guys? Yeah, so, yeah, definitely keep that in mind if you move out of state for a position, if you are in a pickle. Really keep that in mind, and please understand, going to school, getting a degree, getting a great job, You could do all the right things, check all the right boxes, even getting the so-called good job will still leave you in a situation where you're homeless and you're dealing with abuse and you're still sleeping in your car and not able to make it. That could still happen.